Yeah, one in particular that I'm interested to hear your take on is when a company raises capital. And this, I mean, to me,
Mm.
this is a sensitive thing. I mean, and I know that there's different, every case is going to be different. I get that. But you have a client, you sit down, you have this interview, and they're like, "Yep, we want to raise money." Next thing you know, they open up a round, they raise a couple $1 million. You need to be really, really careful from who you hire from a legal standpoint that they're not this dollar signs that now I know how much they have in their account.
Mhm.
Is there, and to me as an outsider, I would think that it's roughly the same amount of work, depending on, maybe there's a syndicate lead or, but in terms of paperwork, what can someone that's investing money expect to see in terms of buttoning up all of the legal pieces of paperwork when you're raising money?
So I have some experience with what you're asking, but most of my capital raising for clients is, friends and family private placement types of deals. But they're still, require a good amount of paperwork and can raise a good amount of money. If we're talking about something that's going to require some sort of a filing or a little bit more sophisticated capital raise, I have a colleague that I refer those to as well. And sometimes, like right now, we're working on one of those together where I handle the transactional side and she handles the securities regulation side of it. But again, no matter how big or how small the capital raise, I still approach it the same kind of way. And part of what I do is I quote a budget. I think you should budget, $10 or $15,000 in legal fees. But the other thing I recommend is that when you're putting together your plan for your capital raise, that you include the legal fees as part of the budget that you're going to raise. So if you were thinking, hey, I'm going to raise $250,000, and I tell you it's going to cost $15,000 for the legal fees, you really ought to look at raising about 265 or 270 and target it that way.
Yeah.
So
And that's really, I mean, it's so important. And one of the things that I wanted to get into, I know that we're going to be taking a break. Maybe we'll touch on it after the break. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we touch on is when you start a business, knowing where you want to go, and perhaps more importantly, knowing what your exit strategy is just as soon as you begin, because knowing that if you're looking to sell or if you're looking to IPO, whatever the case is, that you're setting the table now for things several years to come. And you need to make sure that you put certain things in place in order to make that transition easier and
yeah,
smoother.
let's go there. Let's when maybe after the break or whenever you guys are ready. But I
Oh,
have
do
some
you
thoughts
guys
on
want a commercial? I got one for you. Here you go. Bam! You may know him as Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I know him as just a man who has done incredible things for the last few decades. But how can you use his techniques in your business? I'll show you exactly how. Head on over to ZackMillerSays.com/The Rock, and you can smell what he's cooking.
I think we should be done. I mean, that was awesome. I love it.
Do you know how hard it was for me to record that? Like, it took me like 7 tries. Because I keep getting glare of The Rock, and I was like, wait, do I want to say like what he's cooking? Like, nah, whatever. Okay, so let's get into Tim's question about kind of
Having the end in mind.
Yeah.
I think that I think my wife is watching, which is fantastic. And so I'll share a story. No, I had her brother when he was 14. We had a
Say hello to the wife first. Make sure she knows that you appreciate her.
Hey
hello,
Jenny,
wives.
I'm gonna tell a story about your brother. But he was about 14 and he was really into football and he wanted to play in the NFL and I think there was some family concern about his focus on that and I happened to ask, what's your plan B? And he gave me the wisdom that, if you have a plan B, that means, you don't have any faith in your plan A. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I just like alternatives, I guess. But to Tim's question, people ask me this pretty frequently when they come in. I mean, they certainly have a lot of people have a vision for where they want their business to go, and hope for what will happen, and then they try and plan around that. And so I've had clients come in and ask me for, to help them set up a business that is positioned for an IPO at some time in the future. I've never had a client attain the IPO, but when it kind of you have to think about that idea. What are you setting yourself up for, and how much? I mean, it really cuts against the previous question that you guys were asking about. Do you really want to spend all your money on legal fees when you're starting up? Don't you want to? Wouldn't you rather spend it on something else? And so I think that the best way to look at it, at least from my perspective, is to think about it in stages. And I'll give you a quick example. Years ago, I worked with a local guy named Glenn Moriarty. He's just a wonderful guy. He came to me through a referral, and he started a business called 7 Cups of Tea. And I think he's changed the name to 7 Cups at this point. But I helped him with the setup of his initial company, and his, some of his contracts that he was working with, and some of his intellectual property work and things like that. But, eventually he got accepted to Y Combinator out in Silicon Valley. And when he got out there, they looked at his legal structure and they basically said, this is great for your first stage of your company, but we really need you to now do this instead. And so, they set up a different corporation with a different structure. And by the end of the Y Combinator, by the end of his cohort, he was able to raise a fair amount of money through his pitch. And so again, is what we did in the first stage, was that was that bad? Because no, it wasn't bad at all. I love the idea of, let's start small. Let's start with the basic stuff. Let's keep your legal costs down for the moment. And then as things grow, it's not very difficult to change your legal structure. And so, why invest so much money into, we got to have a Delaware C corporation from the minute we hit the ground when we start up, because our vision and our goal is to eventually, do an IPO. Well, that's a lot of money, a lot of legal fees, a lot of work to do something in preparation for an event that may never happen. I don't mean to be pessimistic about it, but statistically it's pretty rare. And so why not, again, back to one of Tim's earlier questions, why not spend a reasonable amount of money on stage one on your legal structure, with the understanding that if things, as you continue to work your business plan and your vision and things, as they progress, if you do hit milestones that require something different, well, then you can make those changes as you go along.
So I'm pretending in the car what's happened, and maybe this. So the first ever pitch by Glenn on 7 Cups was on our way 10 years ago, 8 years ago.
Yep.
When he, myself, and 4 or 5 others, he said, I had this idea. And so there was this thing by CIT, which is the Center for Innovative Technology. And we were all going up there for some entrepreneurial awards. And there was a handful of us. And he goes, hey, guys, because he was doing something else at that point.
Yeah, I think he was still teaching at he was still a professor at Regent.
Okay, but then he also had that Blackboard style education.
Oh, right. Yep.
There.
Yeah.
And so I guess his wife was a psychologist, or he's a psychologist, or something like that, whatever it was. And he's like, I have this idea, let me pitch it to you guys. And so we actually have it recorded. I thought about finding it right now and posting it here, but I didn't. But literally his very first pitch of 7 Cups of tea at the time, car with Tim and I and a handful of other people. He then, a few months later, pitched that idea at a Start Norfolk that we had, I think Start Norfolk 3 or 4, got second place, And then I remember when he got into Y Combinator, he called me. I was in like a Harris Teeter at something in a grocery store, and he's like, "Hey, I just had to talk with Paul Graham. He likes it. I think they make it happen." And so I didn't know that you guys were working together in that, Joel. That's really cool. But I mean that it's crazy to think of like full circle, how those things happen. And, you know, also just from like the relationship standpoint, like you never know who someone else knows. So don't burn a bridge. I think too many people are stupid about that. Like here we are. I had no idea we have mutual, you know, friends in that. And there it is. But Glenn's come a long way with that, you know, super smart dude. And that's really cool. And I should find that video somewhere because it was interesting. It's probably very similar, but the idea was, hey, you have an issue. You don't want to tell your mom. You have an issue. You go call the doctor, but the doctor can't see you for 4 weeks. Who do you talk to in between?
Yep.
And at the time, he was like, oh, you just pick up the phone and talk to the person. But what he didn't realize is that people didn't want to talk to someone. They wanted to text someone, at least at that point. And so that's pretty cool that you guys were associated together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a neat idea. I have a feeling that we have a lot of mutual connections. I'm a pretty introverted person, and so and also I have a lot of, you know, confidential information locked up in my head. So
right.
But yeah, I think if we started naming names and I started listing off clients, we'd find a lot of connections. So
Love it.